Welcome. Thank you for joining us for Building Bachelor's Degree Programs at Rural Serving Community Colleges. This New America webinar will feature the latest research on community college bachelor's degrees with an eye towards innovative practices at rural colleges. I'm Sue Choi, a Senior Program Officer at Ascendium Education Group. Ascendium is a national philanthropy that seeks to transform post-secondary education and workforce systems to better serve learners from low-income backgrounds. We fund strategies that expand opportunity to more options that lead to good jobs. We support learner success through structural redesign, and we work to help connect systems and align them as well. Ascendium is proud to partner with New America to better understand how community colleges broaden access to bachelor's degrees and support regional economies. This work aligns with our commitment to learning about promising innovations, reforms, and solutions that connect rural learners from low-income backgrounds to post-secondary education and workforce training pathways that lead to good jobs. Thanks to New America and their researcher and practitioner collaborators, the field has access to an impressive body of work. These insights, paired with the white paper published by the Community College Baccalaureate Association on 9 elements of quality CCB programs, provides college leaders and stakeholders with field-driven guidance to inform decision-making and policy setting. As pressures mount for our post-secondary systems to evolve with the needs of today's learners, coming together to share evidence-based practice and building on each other's work is as important as ever. With that, I'll pass to Ivy to kick off the program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sue. Hello and good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from, everyone. We're so glad you're here with us today to talk about bachelor's degree programs in rural serving community colleges. I'm Ivy Love, and I'm a senior policy analyst at New America. Though I am not in the DC office, I am joining you from sunny and beautiful Oklahoma City, where I live. And I just want to say I've had the absolute honor of leading our work on community college bachelor's programs for the past few years. And so today we'll be covering plenty of ground, including a research presentation and a practitioner panel. But so many people have made this work possible, and central among them is our funder, Ascendium. So I just want to say thank you again, Sue, for your opening remarks and for just making this work possible. So as I said, in a minute, we'll be moving into a presentation of some new research that we just published on rural serving community college bachelor's programs and a little overview of the foundation of that work. But first, I just want to give kind of a short introduction into the why and the how and the where of these programs at the moment. So higher education doesn't always move super quickly, but it wasn't really all that long ago that the first state, West Virginia, in 1989, allowed a public associate granting community college to start offering bachelor's programs. Highly, highly unusual at the time, but today we have 24 states of our 50 that allow at least some community colleges to offer at least one bachelor's program. That's a lot of change in not that much time. And there are more states that are interested in bringing these bachelor's programs to their community colleges as well. These bachelor's programs, though, with exceptions that I can count very easily on one hand, are very closely tied to particular professions or occupations. Most commonly, students in these bachelor's programs at community colleges are studying management, nursing, other health occupations, and IT, just for some examples of common areas of study. These are labor market driven, and they're meant to be responsive to local needs. So if you want a full and comprehensive and updated look at what programs are available in which states, I will direct you to the Community College Baccalaureate Association's online inventory of these programs, which you can sort through and look at maps and look at all of the details of these programs to see just how far they've come in, again, a relatively short span of time. And we at New America have been so fortunate over the past 7 years, almost the whole time that I've been at New America, to engage in a range of research projects on community college bachelor's programs. And that included a national inventory in 2021, some descriptive analysis of data from a few states that have a lot of CCB programs. That's an acronym you'll hear me using throughout. So CCB, Community College Bachelor's Program, just for short. It's a lot of syllables to get in without an acronym. We also did a policy analysis of state financing strategies and more along the way. And as we kept doing this work, and as I kept bugging everyone around me about doing rural-focused work, we began thinking about how these bachelor's programs were or maybe were not operating in rural communities and at rural serving community colleges. And that question formed the basis of a lot of the work that we've done in the past 3 years with the support of Ascendium. So if CCB programs are meant to connect people to upward educational mobility and upward economic mobility in their local community, how does that work when the rural community is predominantly or completely rural? What's the same and what's different as other communities and other community colleges? So, what we learned was that it's not always the same for rural serving community colleges. These colleges tend to have much smaller enrollment overall, not just for bachelor's programs, but in general, than their suburban and urban counterparts. And that can make strategizing around building a new program, let alone a new program at a different level that they're unaccustomed to, just a challenging and sometimes a thorny process, but one that is often possible in the right conditions. Rural serving colleges that do start bachelor's programs tend to have plenty in health professions and education, which is similar to suburban and urban community colleges with bachelor's programs, but they tend to be a little more inclined toward engineering technologies programs and more inclined toward agriculture programs, we found in some research we did a few years ago, than their suburban and urban peers. So, as we'll talk about in a moment, some states have policies that present some additional barriers to rural serving community colleges that want to start these programs. And so our goal was to learn what policy environment, what financial environment, what institutional environment made these programs possible and healthy and well, and to bring that to all of you and hope that that serves you in whatever your role may be. So why don't I just give me 1 second to start sharing some slides with you all, and we will talk about the research that we've done over the past few years and some new pieces that have just seen the light of day in the last few weeks. So I want to start with a few briefs that we did not have a public event for, but I will share some highlights with you over the last year. So I want to share, first of all, a few things that we found in Florida. So we published a report in spring of last year with a lead author, the wonderful colleague of mine, Tiffany Tai, here at New America. I was Tiffany's co-author on this brief and very happy to support her leading the development of this piece of work. So we were able to use aggregate data from the Florida Department of Education, the most recent being enrollment data from the year 2021-22. So we're a couple years back, but still recent enough to be able to tell us a lot about these programs. And what we found are a few things: that the average student is still older than 30 in these bachelor's programs across the state of Florida, regardless of area of study. And it is also true that the fastest growing age group is the under 25s, but still over half of students are those who are very likely to have prior work experience, prior higher education experience, and are returning to the bachelor's program later. This is serving a group of students who who are not starting fresh out of high school and going straight through a bachelor's program, typically. And we did see that over half of students in that year were enrolled in some form of a business program, whether that is applied management or accounting or anything in between. That was the most common area of study. It was followed fairly closely by nursing, which is an area of study that's of interest in many states. You don't need a bachelor's degree to begin a career as a nurse, but many employers hope for their nurses to be able to move on to a bachelor's degree and add in some skills of incorporating research into their nursing practice, some additional outside of the clinical practice, but having some more rounded classes at the upper division level. Another common area of study kind of after those two was IT, also very common in Florida. We also found, as we were looking at the demographics of students in Florida who enroll in these programs, that students of color have been a growing share over the years of data that we were able to look at. And that's great. And we do see through that analysis that these tend to be a good access point for students in racial and ethnic groups that have been historically underrepresented in higher education and at the bachelor's level. So just a little bit about Florida. I also want to share a couple things that we found in a report we did on Texas. I co-authored this report also from spring 24 with Elizabeth Meza at the University of Washington, who is also our fellow for community colleges in the Center on Education and Labor at New America, as well as my wonderful colleague at New America, Sarah Netzau. This was the first time we'd gotten our hands on any Texas data, and we're very excited to dig in. We're so glad to have had these aggregate data from the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board to look at to see what was happening with these programs. And we learned a lot. I'll just share a few quick highlights. So first, in terms of the demographics of students in Texas who are engaging in these programs, and this is data from 2018 to 2021. So again, not brand new, but new enough to be able to tell us something. Women's share of CCB students grew a little year to year in the data that we had and reached 64% in the most recent year of data. That's a few percentage points higher than the national average share of women at this level, but not out of the realm of comparison, I would say. What was very interesting is that in no year were there fewer than 78% of students who were Latino in our sample, which is really exciting that this is showing to be an access point for that group of students at the bachelor's level. And we also saw that at least 80% of students in each year had received a Pell Grant at some point in their higher education. And this says a lot about these programs reaching low-income learners who are wanting to get up to the bachelor's level and are able to do so in their home communities. We saw that only 3 rural serving community colleges in Texas by 2021 were offering bachelor's programs. There were pilot institutions in Texas a long time ago, and it's been opened up to most community colleges by this point, but still only a couple of rural serving institutions. They made up 8% of enrollment among Texas CCB students in 2021. Of those students at rural serving institutions who were enrolled, about half were in nursing and another quarter in health professions. So showing that this is a way that students in rural communities can enter and move up in health professions in their local community through these bachelor's programs. And so now I just want to share a couple of things. I mentioned our community college fellow, Elizabeth Meza at the University of Washington. So she and the wonderful Deborah Bragg, who if you know anything about community college bachelor's programs, you probably know it because of some work that Deborah Bragg did. Her impact on the field is wide and deep and important. And so she and Elizabeth Meza recently published this report looking at Washington state data and kindly gave me permission to share some of their findings with you, which are particularly relevant because in this brief, they interviewed 13 either current students or recent graduates of bachelor's programs at Washington community colleges who were in rural serving institutions about their experience and what the rurality and what that context meant for them as a student pursuing a bachelor's degree. So I'll just share a couple of points. So first of all, we can see a little bit of a comparison between the rural serving institutions in Washington state and non-rural serving institutions. The enrollment, maybe not surprising, is a fair bit smaller. There is a higher percentage of women in these programs, a higher percentage of students under 25, and a higher percentage of students receiving need-based aid. So the population being reached by these programs in rural serving institutions is slightly different than the suburban and urban counterparts in Washington's other community colleges that are offering bachelor's degrees. And I wanted to share a few things that came out of these interviews that they did with students who were in rural communities. So they attempted to find some themes in what students shared about what made their experience in a rural CCB program successful or enabled their success. So for many of these students, it was an online or hybrid learning environment that allowed them some flexibility of location, that meant a lot to their success. A cohort model and the social ties that were built both with faculty, with staff, and with each other in their programs was also a facilitating reason for their success in these bachelor's programs. Unsurprisingly, since we saw that even a higher share of students in the rural serving community college bachelor's programs than others were receiving financial aid, it's perhaps unsurprising that having adequate financial aid was a facilitating factor for their success in these programs. And then leadership development opportunities also rose to the surface as an important factor that was helping students progress in their programs. These students at rural serving community colleges that were pursuing bachelor's degrees did also say that they had faced some pretty significant academic and personal barriers on the path to earning that degree, and that they were enormously resilient and that they were very committed to this last point to stay in their home community. That came through loud and clear speaking to these students. And of the 10, that they had a sample of 13 of the 10 students who had completed their degree, 9 of them were living and working in their home community. And so the last thing I wanted to show you about this report is just this quotation that I think says everything that we're trying to get at here, that we hope for with rural community college bachelor's program. So this student said this: college is my home. This is where I've always been. And so I've known this college as a pillar of the community for such a long time. Thinking about going outside of my community, to further my education just didn't sit right with me. And I think that says so much, that wanting to pursue this degree, but also having these deep ties to their home rural community is what helped them make a decision to take this path and to be able to earn that degree. Without this opportunity, that student who was reluctant to leave their home might not have pursued this degree to begin with. And that theme has come through not just in this work, but in other research that's been done, that students are choosing between not pursuing the degree over moving. That's not part of the decision-making paradigm that students are in, especially as we're considering that the majority of these students are older, have been working for a while. Many of them have families. It is the local access that has meant so much for them and made this degree possible. So now I will move into a discussion of our recently published report. We released this on April 23rd, so it's not hot off the press, it's maybe warm off the press. I think it's still a little bit warm from the printing cycle, just being a couple weeks old. So this is some work that I undertook recently. Well, let me just go ahead and go to the next slide. So I'll tell you a little bit about what we did, how we did it, and then I'll share some findings with you. So the goal of this work was to understand the facilitating conditions of a successful bachelor's program at a rural serving community college. How did it happen? Why did it happen? Why is it continuing to operate well? And what are some lessons learned along the way? The goal was to have some recommendations around policy and practice that state environments can vary widely, but could be applicable, or at least parts of it could be applicable to people across states who were interested in bringing these programs to their communities. So what I did was conducted 6 semi-structured interviews. So I have a list of questions, the non-research crowd, I have a list of questions, but give myself some flexibility to respond to what I learn in the interview, and adapt as needed. So start with my list. I talked to lead faculty or administrators at rural serving community colleges who were involved heavily in at least one bachelor's program. And I'll maybe just take a step back because I've been saying rural serving a lot, and I'll just tell you where we got that term, that has factored heavily into our work around rural themes in the past few years. So the Alliance for Research on Regional Colleges, which is headquartered at Appalachian State, but has leaders at many fine institutions around the country, developed a rural serving institution indicator. So it's a complex look at what would make a college rural serving. It's a little bit different than just a rural located college. I highly recommend taking a peek because it does get to some of the nuance of what rurality means and gives us sort of a way that we can kind of divide what it means to be rural for the purposes of research. It gives us a number to go by. So we're looking at rural serving community colleges per that indicator, to develop this sample of interviewees and for other research that we've done in this area. So I was very fortunate to talk to folks from Arizona, California, Missouri, Nevada, Ohio, and Wyoming. So we wanted to get a good geographic spread, lots of different communities. There are some things about rurality that look the same across geographic areas and some that are really different. So we wanted to make it a point to talk to folks in a wide variety of places. And as I mentioned, some of the key things we were trying to get at in this work was to look at the development of those programs, what steps were taken, what worked well, what was a challenge, and look at the policies both at the state and institutional level that folks encountered as they were building these programs, and what might have been more helpful and what was helpful along the way. And then these programs are already off to the races, for folks that we talk to. And so discussing how things got implemented and how we're thinking about sustainability of those programs moving forward was also really important. So now let me just share a couple of things that came up, and I will try not to get do too big of hand gestures as I get very enthusiastic when we talk through these because this was so interesting to do. In addition to the interviews, we just integrated some document review and analysis of state policy along the way. So I'll mention a few of those things as well, particularly on this first point, which is the role of state legislation and regulation in the development of these programs and how that can help or hinder as these things are being conceptualized and moved forward. So there are 2 states where state legislation outlines what it means to either be an urbanized area which would be population density and perhaps taxable income or taxable property in that area. So there's one state that says if your community college does not have a certain population in its service area and does not meet a certain taxable property threshold, you may not start a bachelor's program at that institution. So the deciding factor isn't necessarily labor market need or growing a certain industry or whether there is a public institution of higher education available otherwise that would offer that program. It is the population and the money piece. And there's another state that has a similar policy, not around population, but around taxable property. But in this second state that I'm referring to, it so happens that every community college in that state that does not meet the taxable property threshold to be authorized to offer bachelor's programs does qualify as rural serving. So those are the community colleges that are not able to decide that they might want a bachelor's program yet, that the money piece has already pushed them out of the way. And so that's something to think about. It isn't free to start these programs and it can be challenging. And, we don't want to minimize any of that at all. But yet, if we want to make these programs available, make this degree available locally, especially when we know it's older students who are very rooted, who can benefit from these programs, it's something for states to consider as they're looking at the landscape of available bachelor's programs for their residents. Program development is something that did vary widely state to state. So every state will have a process by which either a state or local, if you're in a state that doesn't have a higher ed agency that oversees program approvals, the process can be very different from state to state. And for example, Florida has been doing this for quite some time. They have a very robust process by which an institution can propose a program. There's a comment period. Other institutions can comment, but they cannot veto a proposed program. And there is always a little push and pull around institutions that might be in the area to hash out how they feel about a community college operating a new program. And sometimes that's pretty smooth sailing, and sometimes it's not very smooth sailing. And that's something that can sometimes trip up a rural college. Even if they have a great proposal and are ready to go, it can just be a little thorny sometimes. Deciding which program works best for a community college, both in terms of sustainable enrollment, how many jobs are available in the area, projected job growth in the area, can all just be a little challenging. There are some occupations where there may not be a huge number of jobs that are needed, but it is a position that is deeply critical to the community. Sometimes that's teacher education. If there are only a couple of small school districts in the community college service area, but there's a struggle to both recruit and then to retain teachers who know the community well, it may be worth the community college thinking about starting a teacher education program, even if it is a small number of students involved. But if you do that, then it does have budget implications for the institution. So this is a little bit of a push and pull, but there are many institutions that have found ways to start those programs that are needed and to sustain them, even if it's not a massive enrollment. And I will say, as we're moving into the third point of enrollment on here, I might just jump a little bit ahead to the right sizing program enrollment because that's what's on my brain right now. I remember very clearly one interviewee saying that her advice for other institutions in rural areas wanting to start a bachelor's program is that do not go for the program necessarily with the shiny enrollment target. Don't necessarily go for the program that you think could bring in the highest number of students. That may be the right one, but taking it slow, starting with perhaps a smaller number of students and having kind of managed growth from year to year so that the program is very strong when you do hit kind of your enrollment stride in a couple of years can benefit students and benefit the institution because you'll have everything in place, well organized. It'll be a well-oiled machine by that time. If you go from 0 to 60 really quickly in the first year or two of the program, that can present some challenges. So right sizing the enrollment, both in terms of institutional capacity and local labor market need, can be really important. Now I'm going to hop back up because I have skipped down my list. I'll go back to recruitment. So this is really interesting because if you are not in a highly populated or a somewhat spread out population in your area, thinking about who can benefit from the programs that are available is an interesting process. For some institutions, especially if they're doing something like an applied management, it may be somewhat easier to welcome students who have a wide variety of higher education backgrounds. They may have an associate degree in any range of subjects, or have some college credits from a while back, or perhaps work experience that could translate into college credit. That will take some policy making at the institutional level to ensure that those students can bring in the credits they had before, to articulate work experience into higher education credit. But it can be done. And if you have a program at a smaller institution that is a little bit of a broader umbrella, that does give you potentially a larger pool of potential students to draw from. But if you have a more specialized program, you may just have to recruit a little more widely, or accept that it's going to be a very small cohort of students every year and work especially hard on making the case for the value of that program in the local labor market, to the health of the community, to the education of the community, and messaging that in a way that hopefully will bring in the resources needed to ensure that your community can kind of grow its own in a highly targeted occupation. For example, like an allied health field, where again, there may not be a high number of jobs in a local area, but really crucial to community health. So as far as admissions and transfer policy, these three points are kind of bleeding together as I'm talking about this. Um, some institutions will process admissions at the institutional level. Some will have the faculty in the bachelor's program do the admissions process. But the point is, community colleges are open access institutions, but that's not true for every program. And so building a program that is selective in any way, just making sure that folks who are entering meet the criteria they need to enter the program, is something that will take time and effort. And the transfer policy, for a few interviewees, they did some really great work to build articulation agreements with other institutions in their state, from community college to community college, or to accept a wide range of credits. I am remembering that one of our interviewees worked out a transfer in policy for students in their own institution, but also from other community colleges in the state, where an Associate of Arts program in early childhood education, which was their area, would transfer as a block, not just credits. Or if they had gotten almost to the associate degree, you could bring it as much of the block as you could. So it's not a one course at a time transfer policy, because we know from other research, students tend to lose credits that they have paid for and spent time on in course to course credit articulation policies. So being able to work out something where you know students are coming in with a lot of credits in your subject area, let's just do it all at once, really facilitated things for their students. So there's a lot of work to be done. And that kind of brings me to program operations. Um, the thing that stood out to me the most here was, unsurprising, but how much time it has taken usually one lead faculty, or maybe a lead faculty and a coordinator, but a very small number of people, no more than two, who are really doing the legwork of developing these programs. And a couple of interviewees, as we were doing this work, said that being able to get a small buyout for their time, maybe instead of teaching one course, being able to devote some of their time to just developing the bachelor's program, the internal practices and policies that need to be in place, the curriculum development that needs to happen, the preparation for either program level accreditation or institutional accreditation change. That may come in the form of an institution's general resources able to subsidize some of their time for a while, or finding another way to get those resources. But it is very time intensive on the front end, and the more you have done on the front end, the better for the program moving forward. So knowing that and being able to have some of your time available to do that is ideal. Um, the other thing I will say is, I'm particularly thinking about allied health programs here, programs that have a lot of clinicals, labs. That's expensive equipment, and keeping those things going is not just the startup costs. When I came into these interviews, I'm well aware that having those facilities in place can be really expensive, and sometimes those costs are really prohibitive, especially for a small institution to manage while they're trying to build a bachelor's program. But for many of these things, there are service agreements needed to keep their facilities, to keep their clinical facilities, to keep their laboratories up to date, and that can still be a high cost throughout the program. So what I learned is that many institutions are somewhat reliant on grant funding, whether that's competitive grant funding through their state or private philanthropy, to be able to meet costs for equipment, for clinical opportunities for their students that are so crucial, But again, for a small institution so determined to meet this need in their community, they're finding creative ways to do it. But the startup costs, as I came in thinking about them, aren't always just startup costs. So keep bearing that in mind for program operations and for funding, for state policymakers to think about as they're thinking about the incredible importance of these programs for especially health education workforce, among other areas of study. That's something to consider. And then work-based learning. These really are all bleeding into one. This is making me feel like my report is very comprehensive and cohesive. So this is good. This is helping me process my own research here. The work-based learning piece, which we consider clinical's work-based learning as well, can be a little tricky if you're in a more remote area. And so locating clinical spaces for your students sometimes takes things a bit of a distance. There are opportunities in some occupations to do some simulated clinicals where you're not necessarily with a human patient, but can complete some level of your clinicals in a simulated experience. That helps. But honestly, for a couple of our interviewees, I'll say one in particular, it was so far to some of the clinical sites for a highly specialized occupation that was very much needed that students had to temporarily relocate sometimes to complete their clinicals. And making sure students have the resources to do that and easing that transition, that temporary transition as much as possible is really crucial. Recruiting and retaining allied health professionals and other health professionals in rural communities is sometimes really challenging, and tearing down every barrier possible, even if they have to temporarily relocate for clinicals, making sure that they are not having to dip into their own resources to do that can be really crucial to make sure that they are able to complete this program and go back to their community, serve their community, and help keep their community healthy. That's just something to think about. It is possible to do great work-based learning in these programs, and it does take some creativity to do that. So now I will just say we have a couple of policy recommendations here that you will be unsurprised because you've heard me talk about all of these things so far. So flexibility is really key for number one. There are some states, I'm thinking of one in particular, where there is a list of 4 occupations that can be the major of a bachelor's program at a community college, and that's it. And that may not work. It doesn't give communities of any size and shape, but for our purposes today, it does not give rural communities the latitude they need to assess what their community needs and then build that thing. If there is an arbitrary clause in state law that says you can or can't do this. So flexibility is really important to let community colleges be their community's college. And then I would say number 2 that kind of rose to the surface was just ensuring the capacity at the institution, both in terms of faculty and staff, to manage advising admissions, curriculum development, teaching, instruction, clinicals. It's a lot, and ensuring that that capacity is available at those institutions is something that kind of administration of community colleges and then state agencies should also be aware of, because these do meet important community needs. And then the startup resources are really crucial, especially for not all rural serving community colleges are small, but many of them are. On average, they tend to be smaller, and that can make meeting the startup costs that are common, the accreditation process, perhaps instructional costs if you need to hire more faculty or hire faculty with terminal degrees, which is sometimes the case for a first bachelor's program at an institution. The startup resources can be really, really make or break for them. And so as states and as private philanthropy, as other organizations think about this, the startup resources are really crucial to be able to give community colleges, once they have the flexibility and the capacity, to ensure they have what they need to launch these programs and sustain them. So I am going to pull down my slides with that. Thank you for listening to me share all of these exciting things with you. I'm going to take a sip of water as I ask my 3 wonderful panelists to turn their cameras on, and we will discuss what this has looked like on the ground for them. You did that really fast, so now I'm still going to take a sip of water. All right. Thank you so much to all 3 of my panelists for being here. I am delighted to have you. And I will maybe just start with an ask for you to all introduce yourselves very briefly. 2 minutes apiece. So all I'm going to ask for right now is just your role at your college, where your college is, just a quick second about your community, and a basic description of the bachelor's program that you are closest to at your institution. So I am going to go and I have you in alphabetical order for everything I've sent you. So Brandon, maybe I'll start with you and then to Karen and then to Russell.
Yeah, thank you, Ivy. My name is Brandon Burke, and I am the Program Director for Respiratory Therapy Programs at Ozarks Tech, which is a community college in the Springfield Branson area of Southwest Missouri.
Great. Thank you, Karen.
I'm Karen Burr. I'm from Clark State, which is in Springfield, Ohio. And I am the developer and faculty lead for the Addictions and Integrated Treatment Studies bachelor's degree.
So thank you so much, Russell.
I am Russell Reed, and I am the Ag Department Chair, which includes the bachelor's degree, and it's in our department. And we're in rural California, up in the northern part of the state.
That's wonderful. Yeah. Thank you all three so much for being here. I very much appreciate it. And my next question for you is why? Why a bachelor's program? There are so many things that community colleges already do. It's a lot of work. I'm curious to know what drove the development of your first bachelor's program, the one that you're closest to. And maybe for this one, Karen, can I start with you for this one? You just tell us sort of the why behind your program.
Well, the need arose quite a bit because integrated treatment studies is kind of code for mental health. So it's addictions and mental health that kind of co-occurring. And I started looking at the program in 2017, 2018, of course, when we had the opioid epidemic and things like that, which hit Ohio very hard. The deal was, and this has been going on for several years, our students would, we've had an associate's degree in addiction studies for quite some time. It did social work and addiction studies. And then the students were leaving to go to some of the area local universities to finish their bachelor's degree for 3 times, sometimes 4 times the cost, and would come back and say 80% at least of everything I use out there in the field I learned from you guys, not from them. So it seemed to be very non-cost effective because at least in our discipline, a lot of the bachelor's courses were theoretical and stuff. And one of the cool mandates, I think, for us is that the bachelor's needed to be bachelor's of applied science. And applied science means let's do the work, which I'm all about anyway. So it's about teaching the students to actually do the work. So one of the big driving forces for us was cost effectiveness. We had a lot of students who were not going on for their bachelor's because of the cost. And also it's an advancement in the licensure, which means my salary goes up and climbs the scale a little bit. So the ability to really not just make a barely living wage necessarily, but a family kind of wage made a difference in making that next step up in the bachelor's process. So we just felt like we could do it better, especially coming out of what we were coming out, the way we had our structured, very practical application forward anyway.
Yeah. Can I ask you, because your program is so interesting. So you're integrating addiction studies and you're
Mental health.
integrating two kind of occupations that aren't necessarily normally like together in the same program. Can you just talk about that for a second? Because I think this is so unique.
Thank you. Well, most states have silos for each of those. Mental health comes from the medical community years ago, and their story is in most states and traveled forward in that way. Addiction studies is kind of a grassroots thing that grew out of the the necessity and Alcoholics Anonymous and so forth that have grown. But since since the mid 90s, addiction studies as well has had licensure and academic requirements to their program. But the two remain separate. For so many clients, a lot of the agencies now go, oh, we put them together. No, you didn't. You walk in the door and you have to go to one floor for your addictions treatment and another floor for your mental health treatment. So, but what's happening is 80% of the clients walking through the door have both. And so if we don't start providing the infrastructure for being able to see both at the same time, we're not serving the clients well. We were stuck at about a 35% recovery rate for both mental health and addictions because we weren't being able to do both at the same time. And so this is the lens that brings us both together. I was one of the first people in the state of Ohio to have master's level licenses in both addictions and mental health. And so for me, it was, it's where the profession is going anyway. We just didn't have the infrastructure to be instructing the treatment providers to do the work well, looking at both lenses.
This is community colleges getting things done. I love it. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, Russell, would you mind telling us a little bit about the why behind your bachelor's program?
Well, it's kind of the situation that this was opportunity that we had at the same time that we've developed over the years our ag program, specifically with horses. And we were pretty much after about 25, 30 years, we were pretty much a very notarized horse program, and amongst some other ag programs. And we also had a intercollegiate rodeo program. So when you had two of those drivers, people knew who we were.
Mhm.
It was our students that really was the ones that were saying to us, we would stay here if we could have another 2 years here. And so what we did is that I hate to go into the process. It's not like we just could go out the front door and say, well, we're a 4-year college. In
Right.
California, it doesn't work that way. So there is a whole out here way of getting to what we did. But we did get here, and it was primarily because our students really needed the opportunity to spend 2 more years here. And we did exactly tie into this idea you were saying of the practicality of our degree, and the idea that we could take advantage of what we already have developed. And
Mhm.
that's why this degree was such an easy, well, it's not exactly easy, but it was a smooth transition. And we were able to, and this is what's probably the most interesting statistic of proving what I'm talking about, is that when we offered our first graduating class, 80% of those were the students that already graduated from our program that came back to get their degree.
Mhm.
80%. And so we only were able to draw in, and that was a pretty good class. We had 20 something students in our first class. All of those students were our returning students to say, I like it here, I want to continue on. And I think that's kind of what our role is, because we, in a vocational program like what we have, is that we really do have to marry this idea of what are the knowledges they need to have, and what are the skill levels that they need to have to be successful in our area, which is a really broad area. It really is.
Mhm.
It's many different careers.
Yeah.
So we had that in place, and we could build on that. And so that's kind of why we started our program. And
Mhm.
uh, it was as I said, you probably later on the challenges that we had, but it was really primarily the idea that, and we were small enough that we can't support all 25 of those students in our community. And so when I look at our community college in our area, it's really Northern California, it's really Nevada, it's really Oregon, and it's really Idaho. So see, we have much more of a regional process.
Mhm.
California doesn't like to say that we're teaching people in Nevada, but that's what happens. That's what.
Sure, it does happen. It does happen. I think that's so interesting, and you're right. Your program is highly specialized, and your students are interested in staying. It's kind of like to the quotation that I drew from Elizabeth's report. This is what I know. This college. I'm familiar with this college.
Yes,
I've succeeded
yes,
at this college. I
that's
want to
very
stay at
accurate.
this college. Yeah.
That was very, very
Yeah.
accurate,
Yeah.
because they felt comfortable. And I think it's to note that, the difference between a 2-year degree and a 4-year degree is time. It's that simple. It is curriculum, of course, but it's time. And how much time do you need to really do a good job, whatever your career level is? How much knowledge do you need? How much skills do you need? Well, there's the big processes we know in education. That goes all the way up to a PhD level of education. So that tells you how much longer that it takes to get, or a doctor or anything in allied health. So the students really realize that they could bloom and really make a big,
Mhm.
big difference maybe in their 3rd year as opposed to their 2nd year. And then if
Yeah.
they have a choice to go somewhere they get the same education at some other institution,
That's
which,
great.
yeah, things change, but at that time when we started, it's getting a little bit different now, but there wasn't that many choices for students to continue on with their education. Right.
Yeah. That makes sense. Especially with like a program that's well known for meeting a very specific need. So thanks for sharing that, Russell. I won't tell you all how long I was in my PhD program. It is a lot of time. Brandon, would you care to share with us the why behind OTC's respiratory therapy bachelor's program?
Sure. Yeah, a lot of it was really born out of necessity for us. We have an area of our state that had a program shut down several years ago, and there were people that were colleagues of ours that we knew that were really desperate. They had, they were trying to hire respiratory therapists in their institutions, and they had open positions that hadn't even had an application for over like 3 years. So we had, it was sort of in the rural, more center east part of the state, which again, there a lot of students that we see going to respiratory therapy programs tend to go to colleges that are local, and then they stay local to work, which is what the community college is really meant to do. So at that time, we had a satellite campus. It's we call them centers. They're not really campuses because they're small. Within 30 minutes of that institution, and at the time, our accrediting body, the respiratory therapy accrediting body, not our regional accreditor, but our programmatic accreditor, had a rule in place that any new programs had to be at the baccalaureate level because our profession is trying to move to make that the minimum standard for entry to practice. So we had a long-standing associate degree program at our institution that, um, similar to Russell, we had a lot of national people actually recruiting from our program because we had a high-quality program. So um, we got those stakeholders sort of reached out to us and said, "Hey, we don't have any students to recruit from. Is there any way that you can start a program in our area?" And we just so happen to already have a satellite campus built in that region. So fortunately, through things that you discussed in your presentation, Missouri had recently passed legislation to allow community colleges to offer programs that were either moving toward or had already become their entry to practice standard. And we could show from our professional organization that they had a goal in place. They had originally said they wanted that to be 2030. That's probably not going to happen, but so we had that mandate and we were able to do it. And
Mhm.
again, our accrediting body wouldn't even let us start a new associate program, so we were required to do that. And fortunately, our legislature allowed it, and we were the very first people to challenge that legislation. And fortunately, we got it passed. And it was a lot of work, and I know that there's probably going to be some questions talking about that. But we actually had a third party, a consultant, come in and actually interview all of the hospitals that were stakeholders in our area, and all the managers said that they prefer to hire bachelor's degree respiratory therapists anyway. So it sort of was a no-brainer to do that. And then when we got the permission to do it, we were actually able to do that degree at our main campus as well. So now we are now a community college we're in a relatively metropolitan sort of metro area, but we're able to kind of outreach to the rural area, and we're now the largest producers of respiratory therapists in the state of Missouri. So um, we've been able to come a long way and to help with that workforce shortage, which is in most allied health professions right now. So
Oh, that's so cool. I didn't know you were the top producer of respiratory therapists in Missouri. That is very exciting. So the why sometimes varies, as we can kind of see from the three programs, but there are some themes, students who are local want to stay local, local need that's arising, and sometimes the profession is going a certain direction in community colleges that are meant to help students prepare for the workforce, or preparing them for the workforce through a bachelor's program now. My next question is about sort of as you're in the program development phase, what did you need from your state, institution, and community to launch your program? It takes a lot. So maybe Russell, can I go to you first? And I am curious, especially from think maybe from the state perspective from you, because California is this, it has its own way of doing things, as do the other states represented here. I know you and I have talked about the state piece before. So what did you need from the state, but maybe also from the institution and community, if that comes to mind, to get this off the ground?
Well, I'll give you a brief history of time, but
Sure.
the California Community College system is quite large, one of the largest in the United States. We have a whole process, a whole area about how to be in a community college because they're regulated and ruled by a community college chancellor, etc. And the legislature all obviously is in on top of all this because they have to pass all the rules that allow us to continue. We started this program as a pilot program for there was 15 colleges that were chosen by legislative mandate to be pilot programs for 4-year degrees at 2-year colleges. That's how we started. We were chosen. It was a beauty contest big time because we not only had to present our idea of what we wanted to do locally at our campus, which is a relatively small process. Then we would have to then we went to the state, and the community college system chose 15 of all the applicants to be this pilot program. And the pilot program was based on, there was some regional stuff that was out there. In other words, they'd like to have something in Northern California and Southern California, et cetera. But then that's what got us going. We were approved to offer our degree, but it was pilot. It actually had a sunset a date on it, and we went through many years of trying to get it to be a permanent program. That just happened recently, just a few years ago.
Yeah.
We actually went to the process that we could offer 2-year, 4-year degrees at 2-year colleges. There's limitations, and I'm not going to spend the time doing those limitations. So that's what really got us going. And I don't know, it was probably much more of what we needed from the state or how the guidance was. It was much more that we needed to be accredited, of course, and they gave us guidelines. And I'm part of that group because we have a community college 4-year degree kind of what is it, an advisory group that we meet once a month to discuss issues. And so we put together a handbook as all these 15 colleges. We got pretty close because there was only 15 of us. We would, at that time, it was Zoom wasn't that big of a deal, but we would we would discuss issues and have different, and then pound out all the different things that we needed to do, because administratively, allied health is a pretty big one of those 15. I would say 10 of those original were all connected with allied health. They had a whole different accreditation process and a certification process. And it's just exactly what Brandon was saying, is that tying this in, they had to take just as many units. Almost, they were only short like 30 units of a bachelor's degree just to get into to be a dental hygienist. It was crazy. So why not just give them that and then they get a 4-year degree? So it was really interesting in those parts. What we're going to do with cohorts or not cohorts, or how people were going to be administered into the program. All those were all worked out, not so much locally, but as the state is concerned, because they got involved in saying, okay, here's what we like you to do. They gave us some guardrails there, some guidelines. This is how you're going to do enrollment. This is how you're going to do that. So that's what the state did. Our system really did help us structure in those earlier years. Now, as time went on, obviously everybody got a little bit smarter, a little bit better, and it's a little bit different process than it is. They do still have to apply to the chancellor's office to offer a 4-year degree, and they still have to be approved, and people look at that and either will reject it or not. There's a whole process. I won't get into that right now. Does that really answer your question on what was needed from the state?
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, and from the community college bachelor's degree group in the state as well, to kind of have the handbook to walk people through the accreditation process, because that can be a bear. So that's good to know, like that was useful to you as well. So
and it was a really
you.
good group. I have to admit, those original classes, those original folks, they're still there today. A lot of them are retired, but they were the ones that were driving the force, and then they were able to pound out amongst all of us all of the issues that we had to deal with, and then how it was going to be dealt with. So we had some kind of a connection to the system.
Yeah, that makes a lot of
Like
sense.
MIS stuff, there's when you get real deep in this, well, how are you going to keep track of the 4-year degrees in a 2-year degree system? That's just one of many that we had to deal with, for example.
Yes, many things. No, so that does answer my question. I really appreciate the context that you gave there. That's really helpful. Yeah, Brandon, maybe I'll go to you next. What did you need take this whatever direction you want, the state, from your institution, from the community, to make this thing a go?
Yeah, I touched on the state thing a little bit ago. Long story short there, we just needed basically our legislature just had to allow us to do it. And then our, we did a lot of pre-work with a consulting company to say that this was needed. We had to do a needs analysis. And then once we had that, once our coordinating board for higher education and workforce development voted to allow us to do it, at that point, then it was just getting in, building the curriculum, hiring the faculty, and then probably the biggest expense was going to be to build out the lab, because everybody knows that works in allied health. We don't make a lot of money, right? We tend to lose money because our faculty are expensive, because you have to hire them out of industry, and another thing is our labs are expensive. Just for example, we were able to write and win a grant. Now we were going to do it either way, because our college is very fiscally responsible and we had enough money to build out our lab. But we actually got an $800,000 grant, and of that, 450,000 of it was allotted to building out the actual lab space itself, and the rest of it was built to purchase equipment and to hire faculty. So the first year that our faculty were hired, we had 2 faculty on full-time staff for our associate degree, and those are required by our accreditors. We have to have key personnel for those, and then we hired 3 more full-time faculty. In their first year that they were hired, they were actually hired under grant funding, so they had to sign a contract saying there was no guarantee that they were going to be continued. So that was a little bit hard. Not only that, but because our profession is associate degree entry, um, our regional accreditor, HLC, requires that you have 1 degree higher than what you teach at, and that is pretty rare in our profession for people to have master's degrees. So fortunately, we had both of our faculty, myself and my clinical coordinator, already had a master's degree, so we didn't have to worry about that part. But when we hired new faculty in, we actually HLC allowed us to hire faculty that had the bachelor's degree, and that we had to put a provision in there that they had to get the master's degree within a certain period of time. So we were able to do that. But then again, the biggest thing for us was getting that funding to build the space, because we had to pipe in oxygen and air to run mechanical ventilators and to do oxygen therapy. We already had the space, which was very fortunate for us. So we already had the rooms. We just had to retrofit those to be for that program. So, I would say to start a bachelor's program, if you're building out a lab from scratch, you're looking at probably $1 million. And that is not something that a community college is generally going to go, yeah, we just have that. So I would recommend that you have either go to a grant writing class or have really good grant writers that can help you to get that funding secured.
Yeah.
Because those were the biggest hurdles. And of course, hiring faculty was a big one. Not to mention the curriculum that we had to build out and all the accreditation that we had to get prior to that. So lots of steps there. A lot of things had to go right, and a lot of that funding was difficult to get, but we got there. So
You got it done. You got it done. Yeah. Thanks for that.
Mhm.
Karen, what did you need from the state, from your college, from your community to make this dream of a program a reality?
Well, I want to applaud my colleagues for all the battling that you had to do. One of the good things about my program is there's hardly any overhead. Okay, so we don't have the equipment, we don't have those kind of expenses and things like that. What we did have a problem with, though, was when we first went to the state, I mentioned our associate's degree was going well, so we decided to build a bachelor's on top of that. Well, in 2018, when I first brought the idea to the Ohio's Higher Learning Commission, we were denied the first time because we were told we would never sustain enough or never have enough students to sustain the program. So they turned us down. Well, we knew better. Okay, so, but what we did, we went back to the drawing board and said, okay, and that's where we went to our community partners, of which we have now over 30 community partners across like 8 counties, and talked about what do you need? Who are you going to hire? What do you need? What does that look like? We were lucky enough to have access to, especially the substance use disorder treatment centers expanding in 2017, 2018 into 2019 because of a lot of the crises. So we about tripled the amount of beds and chairs that were going on in the state of Ohio. So there was a growing need. And so, what would you hire? So we landed the grant first for peer support, and now we have family peer support. We started with the peer supporters, people who themselves have lived experience, can get certified by the state, and it's kind of a mentorship, an extended, professional mentorship kind of program. Well, you can get certified in 8 weeks worth of training. Actually, we did it better. They were doing it in 1 week's worth of training and wondering why the peer supporters weren't doing a good job. So they allowed us to create a curriculum that we did twice a week for 8 weeks, and we began to really have a lot of peer supporters. And then we built the program, and this was key for us. We stacked the program. So you start with coming into the peer support. And again, now we just landed family peer support. So now it isn't just people with lived experience. Now it's people who lived with a family member or loved one who had lived experience. So we just expanded that entryway, by ×4. And so they come in that door. Then there's a first year certificate where they can also take the next 2 courses that they need to get their first level of certification from the Ohio Board of Chemical Dependency Licensure Board. Then that first year leads right on into the associate's degree, at which point there's a licensed chemical dependency counselor license, which is different than a certification. Once you got your license, now you start owning your own skills. So, and we found out that the agencies weren't really helping promote the workers out there to finish their associate's degrees because they didn't want to pay them the extra wage for getting the licensure. They wanted to keep them at the certification level, which was easier for them. But we went back and we partnered with them and we talked with them. We said, you have to let these students have the ability to grow and earn more and be more sustainable. And then we built the 2 years of the bachelor's on top of that. So now when my second years come in, and I always have them for the very last second year course. So the whole time in class, I'm talking about when you come with me to the third year classes in the fall, and you just talk like they're coming. So, and it leads to another level of licensure. Now it's the licensed chemical dependency 3. At that level as well, we went back to the state and said, hey, that you need more help. They're trying to find more mental health help. Well, we have all these substance use disorder, SUD, we call it, all these SUD graduates coming out who are being trained in mental health as well. Give us a certification and make it legit. So they did. We now have the qualified mental health professional certification in the state of Ohio, which I understand has been other places because I researched one of my buddies that I actually met at the conference that was from the state of Washington, and they had just done that out at the state of Washington. So now we have the certification that brings both professions to the table. So you go to the community partners and you say, show us that you're going to hire these people. Show us that you're going to, then we go back to Higher Learning Commission and say, look, we have all these practicum spots set out. We have people say they're going to do this with us. One of the things that was important, because you mentioned something earlier about growing the program at the right kind of size. One of the things we didn't want to do was flood the market around here with so many peer supporters that they couldn't get jobs or they couldn't. So it's been this kind of steady flow. I know one of your other questions is going to be how are things going? So I'll wait to that point to talk about how our numbers have grown. But it was really important to, and I think for us that partnering with the community partners is the thing that made the biggest difference. Once they bought into who our students were, what kind of skill base they were going to have, they kind of quit looking at a lot of the licensed social workers from a lot of the other university institutions and realized that our students had a better skill base because we were doing the practical application stuff that was really teaching them the skills. And it was about going out and kind of selling what they were learning in the program and doing that. Then the college, real quickly, for them to support us, we knew that we needed to be able to grow outside of the area. And a lot of our students, especially students who are in some of the even more rural counties around us, because Springfield's a moderate sized city, which is where the main campus is located. We have a lot of rural 4 or 5 counties around us. Transportation and that kind of stuff is not easy for them. So we didn't do it online because it's hard to teach personal skill bases in an online format. What we did was we went to the hybrid version, if you will. We call it Rally, where you have students who are close by are in the classroom with you, and the students who are distance learners are live virtual with you. It's one big classroom. I've learned how to teach now from the side of the classroom, not from the front of the classroom, so that you can have everybody together and you put all the people at home up on the screen and we're all having a conversation together and we're all doing skill-based stuff together. And so it allowed us to expand again to do some distance learning that was very cost effective. And the only thing the college needed to do for us was have a couple of rooms on each campus that had what we call the rally equipment in it, which is it's the Zoom platform. So we didn't add anything as far as that goes, but we added a front and a back camera that we can go back and forth and have different aspects of the classroom, and be able to have students join us virtually, live virtually at the same time. So that was that cost wasn't terribly, the couple of cameras and the projector thing. And that was really the only extra cost. So one of the things that helped us a lot was we were really able to keep the overhead down. But a lot of collaboration. And once you get the students in the community in, the college and the state kind of comes along because they go, okay, people want this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really wonderful. And it's interesting that you all kind of started at different places where the state piece fell in place first, or the employer piece fell in place first, or the community piece fell in place first. It can go in different orders. So actually, Karen, maybe I'll just start with you for the next question, which is how are things going now? So anything you all want to tell us about how your graduates are doing, how the program's going, how your employers are feeling about having graduates out in the community. So yeah, Karen, do you want to kick us off there?
Sure. We had the first graduating class last May, which was 10. We have 11 graduates this semester, and I have 15 more coming up right behind them. Currently, we have 140 students who have either the associate's level or the bachelor's as they're listed as their major right now. So we got a nice full pipeline. And again, we have the family period. That doesn't sound like a whole lot, but we're the second largest technical program behind the nursing program in the college. And continue to grow. So along the way, because of some of the things we built in the program, like teaching them supervision, actually having supervision as a class, because the bachelor's level people can supervise others, our students are getting promoted out in the field while they're still in the program. Because they work with the supervisors and stuff and they see what they're able to do. You know, it's easy in our field to be working with clients and nobody's really paying attention to what you're doing. So one of the pieces that I created was to have them do a supervision practicum, and then connect with the supervisors and be working with them in such a way that they can't help but see the skills that the students have. And next thing you know, they're getting promotions. We just had somebody named to the Clark County drug court board, sitting on the board for their drug court now, which is, and students who, and I wanted to really understand, we created this program for students who did not see themselves in higher education at all, and people who told them that they couldn't get there. And so to graduate these students and to watch them be out in the workforce and to watch them be sustainable, and it's amazing to me. I'm very passionate about it.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think that's really wonderful. Maybe Russell, I think I might go to you next. How are things going now? I think you have the longest established program of the three. So after going from pilot to permanent to now, how are things going these days?
Well, it's going really good. All our classes are full, and what I think is really interesting, that the big dynamics have changed. We've kind of played around with how we enroll our students and how they get accepted into the bachelor's program. And what we have done, just to make it really short, is that if they complete the lower division requirements, they're automatically into the bachelor's program. So there isn't really an application process per se. It's just we have to keep track that they've taken all the support classes, all of the general eds that they needed to require, and then they can now begin to take their bachelor's level classes, junior and senior year. Now, what's happened is that, and we just had our fall enrollment, we have a special day that we take all our freshmen in. And if you would ask, I think we did about 35 or 40 new freshmen coming in. And if you ask, which we do, majority of them are going to say, I'm a 4-year student here. So our freshmen now are saying that. Now, it's a long way to the end of the race here. So some of them will get a 2-year degree and move on. But even the ones that didn't say that they specifically said, no, I want to come here, then I'm going to transfer to this particular institution. So they had a whole other university level experience that they wanted to have. So it's actually doing pretty well for us, because right now, as we looking into fall, our fall classes, our support classes are all full. And we do have some issues about, where are we going to put our students? So it's a good story. it's going to be a challenge, and it always is for us to make sure that we can get those folks to the finish line. And as you, Karen was so good at saying that, we have done the same thing. We've got a lot of 4-year students that didn't think they were going to be a 4-year student. They wasn't in their wheelhouse that they loved horses and cows and ranching and cowboy and cowgirl, but they had no idea. They weren't great students in high school. And when we started introducing that academia can be entertaining, can be useful, it really changed a lot of people's minds. Now, sure, they had to take the general eds, that the math, and there's a lot of other roadblocks in there for them, but they've been able to overcome that. And I think that, as I said, I think that it is going to be interesting these next several years. We've been pretty consistent with our levels of graduating each year between 15 and 20 students. And each, we do it in the spring like normal institutions do, although we graduate some in the off semester, which would be the fall semester. But we usually have at least that many people walking during graduation. So I think that it's doing well, and I think that we're finding this is probably the strongest year we've had, and there's a lot of pressure about making sure that we have an audience. In other words, that you see enrollments going down in all our institutions, and there's good reason for that. We just don't have as many young people as we did 10 years ago. So things are changing there on that basis. But I feel that the students are going to dictate what they need from us. We'll be only as good as the students that believe of what we're doing is worthwhile. It's that simple. And their parents, I have to admit, their parents come into play. But I always like to think that our graduates, and we have such a wide range. You asked that question, and I don't want to take up too much time, but we have such interesting positions that our students take, because you think that they're going to be dealing with horses and cows and ranching, and we have, we actually hired 2 of our graduates. One is our ranch manager for our facilities, and the other is one of our instructional assistants in our program. So those are 2 recent grads that stayed here. We have another local young man that graduated on our program, is now a realtor specializing in agricultural properties. So those are some of the local folks. And then we have another folks that was working for the UC System Ag Extension, as we call it. He was just hired recently to run to be one of their ag specialists, and they do inspections and do different support for the ag industry in our area. So, and not to mention, we have we had several of our students get master's degree, which we're very proud of, and going into education in Texas and throughout the country. And we have, it's just a wide range. We have one of our students working at a breeding station. They call them stallion stations, and she's in charge of marketing their program. So see, that's that diversity of agriculture, which is such a big tent in so many different areas. So we're fortunate. I know Brandon's kind of tough because, respiratory therapy and any allied fellows, obviously there's probably a good breadth there. They can become teachers back at their program, but you go in for a specific thing, and that's what you do.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing.
I think I get a lot out of what Karen was saying. I think that we're very similar there.
Yeah, that students who weren't maybe thinking they were going to get a bachelor's degree are doing that because it's available, accessible, applied, of interest to them, means something to them. Those are all the things.
Yeah, and we have excuse me, I didn't want to interrupt. But the college, 2-year colleges has a great opportunity. We give them a consolation prize, a 2-year degree. Because in 4-year institutions, as we all know, if you miss one class, you don't get nothing. So it's pretty neat for us because they can see that they can take it one step at a time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, Brandon, I would love to hear how things are going now in the program. You've been running around for a couple of years. Let's hear it.
Yeah, it's going really well. Our first year, we had to scramble a little bit because one thing about our program was that we were the very first community college to offer a bachelor's degree in any program in the entire state of Missouri. So I think that was sort of our chancellor wanted that to be a little bit of a feather in the cap. We wanted to be first. So we sort of rushed around. Our first graduating cohort had 3. That was last year. And then this year, this May, we're getting ready to graduate 11. And then we have about 11 in the program right now that are currently enrolled as juniors. So, we've experienced some growth. The difference that I think that we have compared to Russell and Karen's programs is that we still have our associate program and we have our bachelor's program, but those 2 programs do not cross over. The way that our accreditation has to work is that they're both entry to practice programs. So the associate degree kind of teaches them more of the nuts and bolts of the job, how to get out, how to become a practicing respiratory therapist at the bedside. And the bachelor's program offers more of those, what you would call those soft skills that are, and also it focuses on leadership and management and research and education. So like Russell sort of said, many of our bachelor's graduates are going to be more prepared to be those leaders in the field. But there's definitely some breadth there. Actually, this coming graduating class, we have a couple of really exceptional students that I'm going to hire in our program to be lab instructors and some of our clinical instructors, because quite frankly, I want to keep them on the hook because I think they could potentially be good full-time faculty members if the time comes. So we sort of like to have that sort of transition where we have some succession planning as well in our program for that. One thing we're really proud of is that everybody on my faculty all graduated from the program, including myself, and went on and got the degrees and came back. But yeah, the big thing that we have is we actually had to make our pool larger because our associate and our bachelor's programs don't have a bridge. They don't cross over because we can't do that. And they both are entry to practice. So we have had that's my biggest thing is recruiting. Recruiting is probably about 60 to 65% of my job is focused on recruiting, and I still teach in the program and I love doing that. And along with all the accreditation things that I need to do, but most of the time we're going to career fairs and we're sending emails and we're doing anything we can possibly do to try to recruit students into the profession. And we're trying to steal from our nursing colleagues and our physical therapy colleagues, to try to get those students. So. But yeah, we're really proud. Our college, because we offer the highest degree at our college, we're the only program that offers a bachelor's degree. They actually give them special stoles. They get announced first. They make an announcement that that they have basically that they have the highest degree that we offer. So it's really neat. I'm not an overly emotional guy, but the first time that happened, it was, you get a little misty-eyed because you're like, man, this is really cool. We get to do something that no one else in Missouri has done. So. And then, like Russell said, you brag on some of your students. We have students that one of our graduates from last year from the bachelor's program is practicing in South Carolina right now, got recruited to go out there. And then again, this coming graduating class, we have 2 that we're going to hire because they're excellent students. So, you just like to see those students go out in the field and really do well. And of course, we've had an associate program for a long time, so we can brag on those students as well. But to see those recent graduates in the bachelor's program sort of grow, it's really rewarding for sure.
That's great. Congratulations to all 3 of you. It's a long road to get here, and so to see the bachelor's graduation stoles, to see the jobs, to see the growth is really great. So we are coming up on end of time. So I had another question of my own, but we did get one in the chat that I'm going to ask each of you. It's a big one, but I'm going to ask you for like 2 minutes apiece. So I ask your forgiveness ahead of time. The question is, there's 2. I can only do one. I'm so sorry to the person who just asked a question. This person is wondering how you all navigated concerns from local 4-year universities, because for 4 years struggling with enrollment, this can feel like a threat. Again, I apologize. This is a big question, and I am only going to ask for like 2-ish minutes apiece, and then we'll give it to Iris Palmer for closing remarks. Karen, may I start with you? If any opposition from 4 years, how did you navigate that?
My alma mater gave us the worst grief. That was the funny thing. Yeah. So I just, We were doing a unique program. It wasn't like anything that they had. They were scrambling saying, well, we can get them the licenses with this and this. You're not doing what we're doing. And I just didn't let it dampen us. I didn't, respect but you're not helping these guys with the prices that you're charging for that degree. So I just we just weathered the storm and let them all say, because we had a public forum too. And we had about 12 universities in the area say that, well, they can come here and get that. They can come here, not with the curriculum we were doing. And so people who knew us, and we were talking about, and people who were, the students were coming to us. The agencies were coming to us. We didn't have to worry weather the storm too much with the other institutions. It's nice to partner with them because Wright State wanted my program. That's what they wanted me to take it over there and do it with them. And they were going to charge their price to do it. And I just, I respectfully said no. And there's still a little tension there, but because our institution, our 2-year institution partners with them, they're like right across the street from us in our satellite campus. So but you just, if you believe and it's the right thing for the students and I just think we weather the storm and you just don't really let them because the students will come.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think, can I go to Brandon first and then go to you, Russell? Because I think you might have the longest story. So I want to give you I'm going to give you third. Brandon, did you have any like back and forth with public universities? I think there was at least some discussion, yeah?
Yeah, we did. Missouri State University is actually like similar. It sounds like similar to Karen. We have a very close relationship with them where we actually send them our transfer degree is where they get the most transfer students from our institution. So they actually have a degree in respiratory therapy at Missouri State, but interestingly, they don't have a clinical component. So anybody that starts at Missouri State actually has to come to OTC, go through our associate program, and then transfer back to Missouri State to graduate. So basically, we kind of, in similar to Karen, we just basically said, hey, you rely on us for the clinical education part of your bachelor's degree, so why don't you just set this one out and let us do this? And they were kind of like, okay, because they literally just have a handful of graduates anyway. So what they didn't perceive us as a real threat, and they didn't really want to build a lab. So it was gonna be cost effective for them. And quite frankly, we still get students from their university that transfers to us for their clinical component anyway. So it was sort of a win-win for them. They were like, well, all right, we're not going to fight you too hard. You guys still provide us a service. We'll provide you a service. So we were able to quash that. And then we have 2 other private universities in town that don't really offer anything resembling that. So they just basically said, no, go ahead. We don't really want to start a program. So pretty cut and dried. We didn't have a ton of opposition when we really got down to it.
Yeah, you have like a nice symbiotic relationship with Missouri State. Yeah.
Right.
Russell, you didn't have any discussions with public universities, did you?
Oh boy, howdy. When we started, and I want to make this positive, so that because the person asking the question really might need some help. It's really networking. Agriculture is pretty tight organization, so we network with every college. When we started, we went to every ag program and said, we would like your support. We would like to show, as Karen said, the difference, why they need to come here and not come to the university, because Cal Poly in San Luis was where I graduated. And so I get that. That was exactly what we did. We talked to every one of the faculty members to try to get them on board. That worked. It's not working anymore because the sleeping dog woke up, and the 4-year college is giving a lot of grief to our new programs coming in. The legislator actually that they actually have a role to play. As Brandon said, is there duplication? Boy, that would never fly if we can't offer certain things, because if the 4 years are offering that real specific degree, they won't let us do it. And so we were kind of on the fringes. And so the ones that were really clear cut were pretty easy. That the 4-year college just weren't even touching that topic, whatever that area was. So, I mean, I think that the person asking the question is that it really is important to be able to go grassroots, go to the faculty themselves. We're finding more pushback from administration way up. I mean, the big time folks, because they're afraid of funding. That if they are going to lose some type of funding, it's not so much the students. And ironic, we're all talking about students being powerful. Well, at certain levels, they're not very powerful, because what it comes down to is money. And if they think that the 4-year college has some threat of losing funding, they're going to fight and which they're doing now. And they're really causing a lot of problems. And actually some of our 4-year degree as of recently, like a month ago, the new requests for 4-year degrees at 2-year college are dropping because of exactly all of the pressure that they're getting to say, hey, look, we just don't have the time and energy to do this. If you're going to fight us that hard.
I
So
gotcha.
it's a turf war to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And
It
it's
can
too
be
bad.
really challenging. I think your point to like starting with the its grassroots and its relationships can be a good strategy because it is
I
your
would
neighbors across the street in some ways.
exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
those faculty could relate to that, and they could be your supporters. Although
Mhm.
they get so much pressure, I mean, they're going to lose their job. They can't be, going against the chancellor or the president or anybody else or the department chairs. They're going to get in trouble. So
Mhm.
you really do have to. It's a very thin ice kind of a proposition.
Yeah, and this panel shows that it can be done though. So I want to thank all three of you so much for sharing your time with us and sharing your afternoon with us. And we have just a couple more minutes left. So I am going to have all of us go camera off real quick and I will hand it to the wonderful Iris Palmer for some closing remarks for us. Iris, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you so much, Ivy. What an amazing panel. I just want to thank all of you as well and say a couple of themes that I heard throughout that discussion. Really, the need for community and the focus on community seems to be the theme that was running through everything you all talked about. I want to stay enrolled in my college. I showed these students that they can be successful in a way that they never knew they could be successful before. We're having these programs which are serving your communities and even your regions in ways that are very, very innovative and interesting. It's really complicated to start these in rural areas, and I definitely heard that coming through. And you really have to make the argument that these are necessary for your community, for your students, and for your regions to be able to get the political will and even just the resources and the startup around these particular programs. But I will say, Russell, Brandon, and Karen, it was just really inspirational to hear what you all have done at your colleges to create these programs and support your students through to graduation. And I just want to say thank you so much for that. I also want to thank our audience for joining us here today. This is, I think, an incredibly important topic, and I'm really glad that we could do some deep exploration of what the field looks like and how people are really solving some of these problems on the ground. And lastly, I want to thank Ascendium for supporting our work and Sue Tui for actually joining us and giving us our opening remarks. It was incredibly edifying. And just once again, thank you all for joining us here this afternoon. And hopefully we'll see you in future events. Thanks.